Hello and welcome to And Now for Something Completely Machinima, a podcast about machinima, virtual production, and related technologies. I am here with my virtual co-hosts, Tracy Harwood and Damien Valentine. And not with us this week is Ricky, but we're going to be talking about some films that Ricky had picked in case he was able to make it this month. And Tracy's going to introduce those for us. Two very interesting, very different picks. So Tracy, go ahead.
Sure. Well, Ricky, sorry you're not here to talk about these. He's picked for us two really interesting films, both short, both appear to be test projects, and neither have compelling titles, but actually they're quite different, really, in many ways. One is a student project, and the other is clearly by a professional. And we're going to, we'll talk about these both together, I think. But I'll start by talking about Machinima Final, the first one, the student project, and then go on to the next one. So Machinima Final by Sydney Walker was released on the 10th of February. It's been made in Final Fantasy XIV, and it's a fairly rough and quite naive machinima for me. But what I like about it is the opening scene, which uses the idea of sort of jumping between worlds and not really knowing where you are. I think it kind of sums it up for me in quite a lot of ways, actually. The story is primarily told through narration, and that narration is intriguing because it's reflecting on real life and using the game work to provide a kind of analogy for that. And it's not unlike, in many ways, what we saw with David Blandy's How to Fly, which we reviewed a couple of months back. I think it was June last year, actually. And also Christian Andrews' Let's Play Nomad X that we reviewed last month, where they're both sort of reflecting as they're kind of playing the game, so to speak. But, the reflection isn't necessarily connected to the game context. So there's quite an intriguing approach there. There are some sound mixing challenges with this, but generally speaking, I think it's got the basis and quite interesting ideas. It's a little thin on story. The animation is quite old school compared to some of the other work that we're seeing now, such as the Half-Life project that we're going to be looking at next week, that Phil picked, and also the Astartes Project, the Warhammer 40k project that we reviewed last time. But as a starter project, it's a good effort, and I would certainly encourage Sydney to develop the work further. And as Ricky says, and what he wanted me to say is that although he's not here with us today, he did want to sort of congratulate the student for sort of working with Machinima, and is very keen on hearing what else she produces in the future. So I think it's a great starter project. We're assuming it's a starter project, and we're kind of looking forward to the next sort of level of development of that, which is really cool. The second one that Ricky picked is clearly a different ball game altogether. This seems to be very much a more professional approach. Now, it's not got a compelling title, as I said right at the beginning. It's called iClone Shorts, and it's by Just Art Animation Studios, and it was released on the 25th of February. And this one is basically a character creator test, as far as I can tell. But it's actually a lot more than that. And what I like about this is the kind of psychological thriller horror lens that's been put on this. It really is quite compelling, with this sort of scene of a person strapped in a chair in a room. They're there for a reason. They're a zombie or some kind of horrid creature that's going to attack others, presumably. But the person is in this place where there are others, and the others obviously don't know the true story. And I guess everybody can imagine where that leads, and of course it does. But in some really unusual ways, I think the sound design, the way that it's presented is really interesting. It's quite scary overall. I'm not sure if it's reminiscent of a well-known film. This is, as everyone knows, it's not really my sort of thing, the horror genre, and this definitely fits that from my point of view. I'm sure Ricky would have said a lot more about where it's come from and what the storytelling basis of it is. There is no narrative to it. There's soundscape design, which is incredibly well done. I certainly wouldn't recommend watching it late at night. And I'd say character creator. Well, I think this guy did a really good job with using that tool to showcase it. So really very, very well done on that. I think it needs a title. I don't know what the title will be, but it needs something. It's definitely worth something. Putting over it and badging it because it's great. I think it is worth also mentioning that the film is actually by a Nigerian creator called Benny D or Benjamin Dalsey, who has some animation chops. He animated and directed the Cartoon Network's Dance Challenge series in 21, and is also the creator of Warlord animated series, which is pretty impressive as well. He's also run masterclasses on iClone for Reallusion, which is definitely kind of worth tapping into. And I haven't seen an awful lot of creative work that he's created beyond that. But I think if this is the sort of work that he produces, it's definitely worth tapping into. Definitely enjoyed it. What did you think, guys?
All right,
Damien,
okay.
go ahead.
Okay. I'll start with
Staring contest. Go.
No, I'll start with the horror one. It was a very dark and unsettling film. It shows that you can do some really sort of twisted stuff with iClone. I thought I like that you don't really get any answers to it. You got the situation, you see what happens, but you don't know why, who the characters are, or what's really going on. And I think that makes it even more unsettling, is not knowing. There's a case of we were talking about it a couple weeks ago about we didn't know the world of the Warhammer video, but this time not knowing works because it makes this very creepy and sinister. And I think that the creator knew exactly what he was doing when he did that. And it is a very impressive result. I agree with Tracy. It does need a title because iClone Shorts, hashtag iClone, hashtag character creator, hashtag Reallusion isn't really a good title for this. So if you're listening to this, your film is excellent, but please come up with a name for it so that we can call it something other than that.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting to see what else he can do as well in that. I don't know if he plans to do any more, continue this story, or he's got other things in mind. But this is a very good example of what iClone can do. So I'm gonna move on to the other one, which is Machinima Final. I don't think we've ever seen a video, at least we haven't reviewed one made with Final Fantasy 14 before.
I agree. I think that's correct.
I know it's an MMO in the Final Fantasy series. My knowledge of Final Fantasy is a little bit greater than Warhammer. I've played Final Fantasy 8 and I really enjoyed that. But my understanding is each game is its own world, its own characters, but they have similar themes to them.
Right.
And 14 is the MMO, the second MMO in the Final Fantasy series. And I have a friend who plays it quite a lot, but I don't know too much about it. So it was interesting to see Sydney use that game. It's obviously something she plays because she set this story in that world, and she's used the game that she's very familiar with to tell the story that she wanted to do for her project. And I think that's how we all got started making Machinima. We had a game that we really enjoyed, and we started thinking, what can we do with this creatively? And she decided to do that as her student project. And I can very much relate to that because my very first Machinima project was also when I was a student, and I took it into the class when I finished the first episode, and got a lot of praise and interest from the lecturers at the university. So it's good to see other people doing the same thing, and I'm very interested to see what Sydney will. If this is her first project, it's an excellent first start. I want to see what you're going to do next. You make more Machinima, use Final Fantasy 14 or any other game that you enjoy playing. Think about how you can use those games to tell more stories, because you obviously got the talent and the ideas for your storytelling, and it'd be nice to see more of that. So please continue, Sydney.
Here, here.
Yeah, seeing a film in I guess what I would call this kind of an embryonic stage for a filmmaker, right? You know, all these different elements that we talk about that are related to production and design and story and all that. But when you strip all those away, what's at the core? Well, it's usually using these visuals that you can generate using a game, usually, right? As metaphor. And Tracy, you highlighted that's especially in that early scene, that there was this sense of otherworldliness, or being moved to other worlds. I think I can't remember how you phrased it exactly, but and then juxtaposing that with her narration of kind of feeling like, what's my place? Where am I at? It's that's beautiful. It doesn't have to be sophisticated in the way that an experienced producer might use the word sophistication. This is stripped down. This is ultimately what she's doing. She's attempting to do the same thing that every single film we've ever reviewed is attempting to do, and that's using these visuals generated from some platform to convey an idea. And there doesn't have to be a story per se, much as I love story, and I tend to always rate stuff on here by story. I think it's because I see that there's always been such great potential for storytelling with this. But story doesn't have to be narrative structure. It can just be more in the form of, that's like criticizing poetry and saying, well, that's not, where's the story? You're missing the point, And I think that if I were to evaluate or criticize this film saying, well, there's just no story structure, I've lost the plot. That's not what this is. This is poetry. This is metaphor. This is expression. And yeah, that's awesome. So I hope also that she creates more. Because I think that, just the fact that she went into this world of Final Fantasy and this idea came to her to use it in that way, that's what filmmakers are made of. In the very same sense as some guy walks down a street in New York and gets inspired for a particular scene or whatever, that's this, just virtually. So I'm jealous. I wish that this tech had been around when I was in school, because I totally would have done this as a project for school, something like this, and mine probably would have looked very similar to this, something that 20 years later I would go, well, that seems pretty primitive. Yeah, but so what? My early work was really primitive, really primitive, so it's a place to start, and there's a beauty to it, that it's not been overcomplicated by all the things that Damien has to worry about when producing an episode of his Star Wars series. There's no luxury of just, well, let's just express this idea of this character from Heir to the Empire. No, you can't do that.
I do miss the days when it was much easier.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I think I think it's great, and I don't know, it kind of makes me excited. My kid's about to go off to college, to university, and maybe he'll get inspired to do something like this too, to dip his toe into visual expression with these tools that are just readily available. So I want to thank you both, because as I confessed to you before we started, I was kind of struggling with what to say about this film, because we're so used to evaluating stuff with heavier production value, and I didn't want to be a prick. So thank you, because just your comments leading us off on that really got me thinking about this in a different way, and I'm being sincere. I really do feel this way about it. So that's great.
There's another thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing I was going to say I noticed about it is Sydney used Final Fantasy 14 as the platform, but her video isn't about the world of Final Fantasy 14.
Not even
It's
a
just
little bit.
It's just a way to. It's a platform to tell the idea that she's got, but it's not about that world. We've seen lots of videos in World of Warcraft where it's very much about the World of Warcraft, or Star Citizen videos where, you know, all these other MMOs, the videos tend to be about the world that the game takes place in, and this is different. This is just a tool to express an idea, and I think that's something to be admired as well.
That's a great point too, Damien, because if you've played a Final Fantasy game, you can't play the game and not learn something about that game's lore. It's a story-driven game, you know. I mean, it's a RPG at its heart, but I mean, there's story to it. Those games have always been that way. For 20-something years, they've been making these games, and they're always that way. So it's not that she wasn't exposed to the story or didn't know the story of the game, but it just didn't occur to her. That wasn't what inspired her. Yeah. That story wasn't what inspired her. She had a story of an idea and saw it as a platform. Yeah, and that's great. Yeah. I wish more people would. I wish as many people would do that as do the other, which is they really get psyched about the game world, which is completely understandable because there's some really, really, really talented storytellers in the video game industry. Some of them, you know, just as talented as the top Hollywood people, in my opinion. There's some incredible story going on in games. So, yeah, that's a great point, Damien.
What about the other one?
Yeah, Ricky's pick number 2. I hate to keep referencing what we were talking about before we started recording, but we were talking about before we started recording that I've kind of recently, I'm a late bloomer in a growing affinity to horror, which I'm sad Ricky isn't here this week to hear me say that because he would be just delighted. But so this was just right up my alley, you know. It's psychological horror, you know. Really, really well produced. And Damien, you hit the nail on the head for me, which is there's an ambiguity surrounding this story. There's unanswered questions here. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Astartes Project, and I mentioned that it bugged me, that I felt uprooted. I felt lost. I was very conscious of that as I watched. And in this, the ambiguity didn't make me feel that way. And I've been pondering, well, why is that? And I think it does come down to that this has some moorings in, excuse me.
Bless you.
Has some moorings in recognizable experience. And I think maybe I mentioned that during Astartes too, that, you know, these are archetypes of characters that we recognize. We may not know what this specific situation is, but we know what a messy, presumably mental hospital, we know what that setting looks like. And, you know, someone who is being medicated, presumably against their will, and maybe is a little dangerous until they've been medicated. That's a metaphor that we've seen many, many, many times. Most of us not through any personal experience, through the cinema experience. We recognize that. And so the fact that those questions aren't answered, to me, that's why those didn't bug me, is because, okay, I get it. I know enough about where we are and what's happening here to go on this little journey with you. Yeah, and that's important. Basically, whereas Astartes Project was relying on moorings from the game world, the game lore, this relies on moorings from the entire cinematic universe. You know, this is essentially a form of the cinematic language. This painting things with this brush, you know, with this idea. And you can do that more safely because more people are going to visually relate to that idea as soon as they see it. So I don't know if the filmmaker probably wasn't sitting there being real conscious about that. These are things that we do kind of intuitively when we're cinephiles. But yeah, just wonderfully done. The rendering was really cool. I liked the use of reflections, and the characters were just extraordinary. There's a couple scenes in particular that just really were impactful. There's one point where the woman who's in the patient gives this like full-bodied, full-throated scream, and her mouth just wide open, just screaming like that. And just the angle that he chose for the shot, and the slight effect put on it, and the expression on her face, it wasn't early days of iClone. It was remarked upon that they've got dead eyes, or they're just not fully expressive. It's like somebody who's had too much Botox or something, and they can't fully lift their eyebrows or something. And boy, he made sure that the full he went the full length of the sliders for the different morphs, right? To get just so many different looks out of these faces. That's character creator. If you don't know, that's what character creator, one of its strengths is the ability to do that, to shape the body in particular ways and to morph it. They're rigged. Characters are rigged to be able to morph in increasingly impressive ways. Every new release of that aspect of iClone is just more and more impressive, more and more. Well, I don't want to say it's more and more realistic. It can be if it's used in that way, but it's more and more expressive, because you can do it very cartoonish, but the range of expression is impressive, and the way that he used it in this was just terrific. So. Was it perfect? No, absolutely not. It's a little bit rough around the edges at points, but I don't know. I didn't mind. I can't say that I didn't notice, because I've made films, and so I can't unsee that stuff. I wish I could sometimes just turn it off, but it didn't take me out of the moment of the story. It was interesting, and this is one of those where, even though there's all that cloud of ambiguity around this little capsule of a story, it's a capsule of a story that it made me as a storyteller think, oh, I could see taking that capsule and placing it in this context, and to put the before and after, what the wider story is, or over here in this one. That's pretty cool. It takes a unique set of skills to craft something that's transplantable like that.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed it a lot. What I would recommend to the creator, because some people are just not title makers. Maybe this guy's, this person's clearly very, very creative, but maybe it's just his Achilles. He's not good at coming up with titles. Well, crowdsource it. Come on. If you can't, then throw it out there to your fan base, small or large, because there's people out there who don't have your filmmaking skills, but are really good at
Phil,
coming up with names.
Or a number.
Yeah, that's true.
What was yours called?
917. Yeah. Of course, that was from the source text, so we kind of cheated there. But yeah, no, why not?
Sometimes
at least something to make it identical. I'll tell you the big disadvantage of using a number. Not great when it comes time to try and find it in search engines.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Unless you
it's
spell it
like
out.
naming your film. Yeah, not great in that regard. So you want to be practical with it. It needs to be a little bit unique, but it doesn't have to be complicated. But I mean, if you look through if you listen to any modern music at all, or follow any bands, I'll bet you could name a band in your collection where you go, wow, that's a great song, but these guys really don't know how to name songs. Eddie Vedder is just a brilliant musician, vocalist, lyricist. Naming songs is one of their songs is like an elderly woman at a downtown cafe sitting at a stool. It's like, dude, what are you doing? And that phrase isn't even in the song. So anyway, just I don't know. If it were me, I would probably be inclined to crowdsource it. There's a guy that I follow on, excuse me, the guy that I follow on Facebook, on a group of, it's all just people who play piano, like me and other people. And every once in a while, people will post what they've played or what they're composing right now, and then others get to comment on it, whatever. And there's this one guy who, Dimitri, who comes on there and he'll say, "I'm working on this, but I have no idea what to call it. What does it make you feel?" And I mean, the breadth of responses that he gets, it's like a full, I don't know, he's using it like an AI prompt almost, except it's people.
Freaked out is what this made me feel.
They'll just descriptively tell him what it makes him feel, and I'm sure he has no trouble coming up with the title after that.
Yeah.
So those kinds of ideas are interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, so very interesting picks, Ricky. Has everyone gotten to weigh in?
Yeah.
Did we all talk? Okay. I'm kind of starting to lose my voice. So
plenty of times.
Yeah. Okay, well, that is Ricky's picks. And we will see you next time for a Half-Life 2 movie that I've picked. So, Tracy, Damien, thank you very much. And we'll see everyone next time.